Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that really helps my channel get promoted. I also love it if you leave a comment. A couple of months ago, I think it was, I did 3 different projects that had water as the theme, and I thought what's some other things we could do a theme with, and today I think I'm going to do 3 fire themed pendants. I think it'll be fun. I drew a couple that were relatively easy and then one that's a little more challenging, and we can see how they turn out. So I'd like to thank my patrons over on Patreon who are my premium supporters, and I really appreciate not only the financial benefit I get from that, but also the interactions and the nice people I've met over there. I hope they've learned as much from me as I have from them. I've learned so much. Thank you so much, you guys. My other group that I'd like to thank are my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 9,100, and that's amazing, and I really appreciate all of you signing up. And if you're not a subscriber, you should be. I have lots of content here, and I think you'll enjoy it. So thank you for being my subscribers. I appreciate the nice input, and I really do appreciate the financial contributions, like when you buy me a coffee or do a super thanks. That really helps out with supplies and stuff, so thank you for that as well. All right, let's get started on these 3 projects. Let's see what I drew up today. This is my design idea book, which you can get on my merch store if you're interested. I find it extremely useful for sketching out my ideas. I didn't used to do that, but anymore it really seems to help me clarify what I'm planning on doing in my mind, and also come up with a better plan instead of just going into it blind. So I find them useful. So here's the 3 different ideas I came up with. One is going to be a bezel for this piece of black onyx, which is kind of a flat disc. I've had it for years, and I've oftentimes wondered what I should use it for. I'm going to use it as the background for a cutout of a piece of a flame like this out of sterling silver. And this will be bezel set, so you could wear this backwards or forwards if you wanted to. I'll just have a kind of my little standard bails. If you want to see how to make that kind of a bail, I'll put a link up there for you. So that'll be number 1. Number 2, I'm going to do a 3 metal piece where I'm going to have brass in the back, and then over the top of that I'm going to put a piece of copper that's cut into some flamey kind of shapes, and then a little piece of silver at the very front with some more flames. So I'm not sure how this one will look. I think it'll look cool, but we'll see. I'm going to put a little hidden bail behind there for the chain to run through behind that flame. The third one is going to have 3 stones. I made some bezels in advance since we're doing a 3 project video. If you want to learn how to make a bezel for a faceted stone like this with a step in it, there's a video about that right here. So got this guy. Is a great bright orange cubic zirconia. I think it's about 8 millimeters. We got this little garnet here, which is I think a 6 by 8, and this little oval citrine. It's almost, I think it's a citrine. It was in with my citrine, so I'm assuming it's a citrine, but it's almost peach yellow colored. So those will be bezel set faceted stones there with open backs. And around it I'm going to take some half round wire and taper it on the end so that it comes to a point, and then make it kind of insinuous fire kind of shapes. And I'll probably put a hidden bail behind this for that to hang from, but I think that'll be kind of a cool one. So I think this one will be relatively easy, this one pretty easy, and then this one a little bit more advanced probably. So if you haven't done any bezels for faceted stones. Okay, so we'll start with this one. We'll make a bezel for this to get going, and then I think I'm going to use 22 gauge sheet for the back, which we'll cut this shape out of. So let's get started on that one. For this I'm going to use a little bit thicker bezel. I'm going to use 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip in 26 gauge, so it's a little thicker than some. Not as thick as others though, it's kind of in the middle. But it should make a nice sturdy bezel for this. If you've never been to my channel before, I use hard silver sheet solder and liquid flux called My-T-Flux that I spray on, which I find pretty effective. I'm going to move this out of the way for now. We'll make a bezel for this guy. My torch is a Silversmith model, which is their acetylene air torch, which I've used for many, many years and I really like. Puts out just enough heat to really be able to do stuff easily. When I mark for a bezel like that, I always leave just a tiny bit extra, since I'm going to file the end. I generally make my bezels into squares or rectangles to make it a little bit easier to solder them. That is not the only way to do it. However you do it is probably fine. When I'm doing a little bit bigger bezel like this, if I put a little dimple in the bottom like that, it makes it slightly springier. And so I have a little better time getting those ends to meet up and push together nicely. So let's cut a little bit of solder. I'm just going to reshape it into a circle. I think we nailed the size on that one. I pre-cut a piece of 22 gauge sterling sheet, so it's a little bit big for this. We'll solder that down and then trim it off, and then we're going to cut out that shape on the back with a saw. I'm using 22 gauge instead of 26, which is what I normally would use for the back of a bezel where it's non-structural. But for this one, since we're going to cut out part of it, I want it to be a little bit thicker, so it's flimsy. I frequently get asked about these little shears, and what they are is Fisker's craft shears. Just to save you the trouble of asking me. You can get them at most hobby stores around here anyway. So let's put a little bit of solder in here. Actually, quite a bit of solder in here. Let's push this up against the edge so it's touching the bezel itself and the bottom. And the reason I leave a little bit of extra around the outside here is so I have a place to pump some of that heat into the bottom piece, because the bottom piece has a lot more mass than the bezel does. And the bezel is sitting on top exposed to the flame itself pretty directly. And so getting that bottom piece up to the 1450 degrees it needs to be in order to make that solder flow is a little bit harder than getting the bezel there. So you have to spend a little more time heating it without melting the bezel. Why beginners melt bezels a lot is because harder to get that bottom sheet up to the temperature. I still occasionally melt the bezel when I lose my focus. I'm just tapping it to make sure I get the seam all the way around there. The solder will wick along the seam nicely if you get the thing hot enough. Let's cool that off. So another question I get a lot is, what tip do I use on my torch? And it's a number 1. I use a number 3 if I'm going to melt some silver for freeform castings or whatever. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim off the excess on this one. Now I'm just going to file it flush with the base. I always want to be careful not to hit the top of the bezel up here on top because it thins it out. It's okay to merge it into the bottom part a little bit. But if you get that top too thin, it becomes fragile. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to color this purple with my marker. Sometimes I use masking tape and actually just put some tape on the back and then draw it with a pencil. See if I can freehand those flames pretty good or not. I can always go back and add some tape if I don't scratch it in there very well. Makes it a little easier to see precise lines if you put some ink on the back and then scratch something through it. So one thing I want to do is I want to have a little ridge from the outside that sticks out a little bit. So let's see if I can get this to scratch in there pretty nicely. I hope you can see what I'm doing there. That. I have a T-pin here. Let's decide. This will be the top point right there. I'm modifying it a little bit as I go here. Okay, so I'm going to have to drill. I need to make sure I don't cut out the wrong parts. I've done this before where I cut out the flame instead of the, or whatever I'm doing. So I'm going to make little marks wherever things need to be cut out. And so I'm going to go drill a couple of holes, then we'll start sawing. I think I'm going to use a number 1 for this. Or excuse me, a 0. You can see I drilled 3 holes through it. Start with a little area, see how my sawing is today. Sometimes it's better than others. Okay, we got that sawed out. I'll clean it up with the file a little bit, and then we'll put a bail on here, and then we're going to pickle it. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is, remember I said I was going to make one of those standard bails that I left a link for you earlier in the video This is what it looks like. But in order to attach it to this, we need to connect it to our bezel here. And I've already soldered it closed so we can just butt it up against there, and that'll be, I think I'll just do it right at the top of that flame there. Just going to pop this over that, and then I'm going to bend these towards each other a little bit. So they're touching. Okay. The last thing I'll do is pickle this. Well, actually, I will file this down to the correct height for this particular black slab of onyx that I have here. So it just barely is right above the angle of the top here, and then we'll just bezel set that. But in the meantime, we'll pickle that, and we can work on the second one. So, for the sake of time, and since you just watched me saw, you probably have had enough Chad sawing. So what I did was I did these off camera. I think I'm just going to lay them kind of like this. One on top of the other one. And then we'll polish it up after we add a little hidden bail on the back. So I think the easiest way would be to probably sweat a little solder on the back of the copper one to start with. Sweat soldering is where you pre-melt some solder onto something that's already in place. Doing it this way so I don't have a lot of excessive solder flowing out onto the brass. Position that in a pleasing manner. That solder side down. That looks pretty good to me. So it's going to go like this, kind of. So we need to put a little on the back there. This is pretty pointy. I may file that just a little bit down so it's not quite so sharp. Anybody stabbing themselves in the chest. If your customers injure themselves on their jewelry, it's probably not a good thing. Okay, so on the back I want to put a little bit of hidden veil there. And I think I'm going to use a little bit of this, I think it's 12 gauge half round. So bending this with the rounded side inwards so the chain will travel through it smoothly. And let's see. I'm going to pick a little bit of solder to the bottom of this thing, and then we should be able to just plop it on there. That hangs okay. All right, I'm going to pickle that one. I'm going to start work on this third one. I think I'm going to do this one separate from this one. So I need one that's going to, just using some skinnier wire than what I'm going to use to make this. And like I said, I'm going to use 8 gauge half round. So I'll use this to measure a piece of 8 gauge half round. I'm going to add a little bit extra to compensate for this curve I'm going to have to go around. Maybe an extra 3/16 of an inch or so. But again, I'm guessing. So I'm going to file the overall thing a little bit thinner on one side, and then I'm going to taper it, I think, so that it gets a little narrower there and then gradually tapers there. So this may take me a while, so I'm probably going to cut a lot of this out. So we need a slight curve up here. Okay. Curves back this way a little bit. And kind of right here, goes back around that way. Then we have to get this to curve around. You may need to use a jig or something in order to bend this. I'll show you what you can do. Sometimes you can use these little vices like this, kind of as a bending jig. It allows you to keep it relatively flat, you know, to get it to bend sharply. But it's still going to try and curve on you, so you're going to have to go back and flatten that back out, and then anneal it probably. So we'll do that and then continue the same process. So you can see we've got it kind of most of the way around there. But I've had to go back and flatten it out several times. So I'm thinking though, if I can get this smoothed out on the inside just a little bit, maybe we should solder it to this one. And then we can bend it the rest of the way. That seems like it might be a good idea. I'm going to try and bend it underneath. I may need to grab it with something though. So I'm going to cut it off right along that edge there, and then we'll solder that to that. Then we'll start adding some more components. Okay, I was looking at the way this sits. I think next, I'll go ahead and solder that on there like that, and solder that one closed. Okay, so I think I'm going to do this smaller one next off of this. This is that 12 gauge half round that I use for the bail on the other one. I'm going to cut a little piece, longer than I need probably. And then I'm going to do some tapering like I just did. In fact, I might go ahead and cut all these and file them so you don't have to watch me file, and then we'll assemble them in a minute here. So, be right back. Okay, so I soldered that one on this base here and to that bezel. Now I'm going to solder it there after I bent it around. I've tapered it to a point, but then I cut it off, and then I'll just, wherever I stuck it, I'll use that for the part that sticks out over there. Hopefully I haven't lost it. I found it, so now we can solder that on. And when we're soldering something like this, there's a lot more mass in this piece that I've already soldered together than this little piece, so I'm going to heat mostly over here. Get a good solid connection there. Now I'm going to shape that and maybe add that other bezel and then do some more filing on another piece. It's not quite exact, but it's pretty close. So I think I'm going to put a little tiny half circle on the back here and use a real delicate chain for this one. I think this one requires a delicate chain, so I really kind of like that so far, so we'll see how it turns out. Put a little bit on the back of this thing too, just to make sure we get a good solid connection. Okay. Magnesia blocks are super handy, but kind of messy. Fall apart. Okay, I'm liking that so far. So I'll pickle this, and then I'm going to clean up all three. I'm going to set the stones off camera. Like I said, if you want to see how to do a bezel set faceted stone, check out that video I mentioned earlier. But yeah, let's let that pickle for a while. So I got everything set and polished, and I'm relatively pleased with them. I had a little trouble getting polishing in the little crooks there, but I think over time that's going to oxidize anyway in there. So this is the first one with the black onyx kind of as a background for it. I really like that. Look at some pictures of all of these after I'm done here. And this one. And then finally, I think I'm really pleased with this one. I like how it looks. It's interesting, and I think it'll hang nicely with just a little kind of simple chain behind it. I'll probably use a very fine chain. So, but either way, thanks for watching, and I will take some better pictures and put them at the end of the video. Well, that was the 3 fire-based pendants. I hope you enjoyed those. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. I'd love it if you'd take a moment and look over some of my content. I have a ton of content here now. I've been doing this for a couple of years at 3 videos per week, so there's quite a bit of material to peruse. So check it out. Give me a subscribe if you want to, and don't forget to hit the video description down below for some relevant links if you want to become a supporter of the channel. You can buy me a coffee down there. There's a link to that. There's a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea books or some other merch like a coffee cup or something. There's a link to my website where I'm having a 20% off sale right now, so you should check that out if you want to get some jewelry that I've made. And finally, there's information about my Patreon, so check that out too. All right, well, thanks for coming by. Take care. Happy silversmithing.